Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The sharp scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, clinging to the hospital room's walls like an unwelcome reminder that life was slipping away. The rain tapped against the window in a steady rhythm, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something final, irreversible. Lily, just 19, sat frozen in the corner chair, knees drawn to her chest, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The storm outside mirrored the one raging inside her. Her parents were gone, both of them, in a single shattering moment. It hadn't been a tragic illness or a long goodbye. It was a crash, sudden, brutal. The car swerved on a slick patch of road. The metal screamed, and by the time help arrived, her world had already ended. Her mother's hand, once so warm, lay cold in hers. Her father's laughter, once the soundtrack of her life, was silenced forever, and Lily, alive but broken, could only sit among the wreckage and scream their names into the wind. The funeral came too quickly, too quietly. Umbrellas gathered like mourners in a sea of black, but the only thing Lily could remember was how the coffin seemed too small for the people who had filled her entire life. People whispered their condolences, hugged her too tightly, and avoided looking her in the eye. What could they say to someone who had lost everything? Then came the paperwork. The house, her childhood home filled with love and Sunday pancakes and bedtime stories, was to be sold. Debts, the lawyer explained with mechanical detachment. Outstanding loans, unpaid medical bills, or you'll be placed in the care of your next of kin, he said, sliding documents toward her with the same tone one might use to discuss groceries. Your aunt and uncle, George and Clara, they've agreed to take you in. Agreed? As if she were a stray animal being fostered out of pity. The Thornton estate sat on the far edge of town, elegant and distant, perched on a hill with its iron gates and perfectly manicured hedges. But the beauty was skin-deep. Lily felt it the moment she stepped inside. The cold, sterile air, the way Clara's smile never quite reached her eyes. The rigid nod George gave her, instead of a welcoming gesture. It wasn't a home, it was a place of obligation. You'll have your own room, Clara said, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. You're expected to respect the rules and pull your weight. You're not here for charity. Lily nodded, numb. There was no point in arguing. Grief had hollowed her out too thoroughly to fight. Her room was spacious but soulless. Antique furniture, heavy curtains that blocked out the light. No trace of comfort. Her suitcase sat unopened in the corner as she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. The silence was suffocating. The following days blurred into each other. Clara delegated chores with military precision. George barely acknowledged her existence unless she was needed for appearances, serving tea, helping with dinners, organizing files. You'll earn your place here, Clara reminded her coldly. Nothing in life is free. Lily obeyed, always quiet, always unseen. She learned quickly how to be invisible, how to keep her voice low, how to anticipate needs before they were spoken, how to nod with gratitude even when her soul ached with loneliness. Her grief, instead of being nurtured, was buried beneath layers of expectation. Nights were the hardest. In the darkness of her room, Lily would clutch the only thing she had left, a photograph of her parents. It was faded and creased from years of handling, showing a young couple holding a toddler version of herself. All smiles and sunlit joy. She'd traced the contours of their faces with her fingertip, whispering broken prayers. I miss you. I don't know how to do this alone. Please give me a sign you're still with me. But there was only silence. She wasn't allowed to return to school. Clara claimed it was unnecessary. You'll be married soon enough, she said cryptically one afternoon, as if dropping a seed meant to be ignored until it took root. Lily frowned, but didn't respond. She didn't have the energy for curiosity, until one night she heard it. It was late. The house had fallen into its usual hush, and Lily, unable to sleep, wandered toward the library. As she passed George's study, she heard voices. Low, urgent. This is our way out, Clara. You know it. He's willing to pay everything, all our debts. He's already drawn up the contract. Lily doesn't need to know until it's settled. It's not like she has a better option. She stopped breathing. Frozen, she stood outside the door, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She didn't want to believe what she'd just heard, but part of her already knew. The next morning confirmed it. George summoned her to the study. Clara stood by the window, arms crossed, her face carved from ice. Lily sat down slowly, hands trembling in her lap. We've made a decision, George said without preamble. You are to be married." Her breath caught. "What?" "To Mr. James Vale," Clara added, her voice cutting. "A man of considerable means. He's agreed to eliminate our financial burdens in exchange for your hand." Lily stared at them in disbelief. "But I don't even know him. I can't." "This isn't up for debate," George interrupted. "You have no prospects, no income. You live here because we allow it. This is your chance to repay that kindness." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She felt like the ground had vanished beneath her feet. "How old is he?" she managed to whisper. 49, Clara said flatly. "Successful, respected, and interested in giving you a future." "A future?" It felt more like a sentence. Lily stumbled from the study hours later, dazed. The walls of the estate closed in around her like a prison. Her chest ached with the weight of powerlessness. No one had asked her what she wanted. No one cared. Her life had become a bargaining chip in someone else's game. That night, she stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the girl staring back. Her cheeks were pale, her lips bloodless, her eyes dull. This wasn't the vibrant, curious Lily her parents had raised. This was a version molded by grief, by silence, by forced obedience. Outside, the storm returned. Wind howled through the trees like a warning, and deep in her bones, a quiet voice rose, weak but steady. "This can't be the end of my story." The days that followed felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Lily moved through them like a shadow, stitched to the fabric of the Thornton estate, present but never truly seen. She woke each morning to a world where her voice didn't matter and where her future had been signed away with the flourish of a pen. The marriage was happening. No one asked again. No one needed her permission. Clara handed her a folder 2 days later, thin and elegant, bound with a blue ribbon. "These are the legal papers. The engagement announcement will be sent out tomorrow," she said without a glance. Lily stood motionless in the hallway, her fingers numb as she took the weightless but damning envelope. Inside were documents that defined her fate: contracts, confidentiality agreements, even a schedule for fittings and rehearsals. It was all so organized, so polished, so terrifying. James Vale. The name alone made her stomach tighten. She had never met him. She hadn't seen a photo. All she knew was that he was 49, rich beyond imagination, and influential enough to make her family's debt vanish with a signature. What did a man like that want with a girl like her? What did he expect? One night, unable to sleep, she crept down the hall to Clara's office and did what she never thought she would. She opened Clara's laptop. "Gil prikkel under her skin," but fear pushed her forward. A quick search revealed everything the documents had failed to say. James Vale was tall with silver-streaked dark hair and piercing eyes the color of smoke. His face had the kind of gravity that made people go quiet, intimidating and unreadable. Forbes articles called him a genius, a recluse, a man who rebuilt empires with his bare hands. There were pictures of him at galleries and events, always alone, never smiling. He looked powerful, dangerous, and now he owned her future. When Lily returned to her room that night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine the life ahead. She would be Mrs. Vale, 19. No college, no career, no dreams of her own, just a wife to a man 30 years older, a stranger. The morning of their meeting arrived, wrapped in dread. She wore a cream-colored dress Clara had picked out, modest, high-collared with sleeves that swallowed her wrists. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun. "You're not dressing to seduce," Clara had said coldly. "You're dressing to behave." They met at an exclusive hotel lounge downtown, quiet and dim, with jazz music drifting through the air like perfume. George and Clara sat on either side of her like bookends, smiling politely as James entered. The moment Lily saw him in person, her breath hitched. He was even more imposing than the photos. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a navy-tailored suit that whispered money and control. But it was his eyes. Calm, sharp, unwavering, that unnerved her most. They swept across the room, landing on her like a silent question. "Mr. Vale," George said, standing. "May I present Lily, your future wife?" Lily wanted to disappear. James stepped forward slowly, extending his hand. "Lily," he said with quiet gravity, "it's good to finally meet you." She hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed her trembling hand in his Ryman. His grip was firm but not cruel, warm, grounding. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, she saw something unexpected flicker behind his composed mask. Curiosity. Even concern. They sat. The adult spoke first. Details, deadlines. George discussed the wedding plans. Clara explained her expectations. Lily stayed silent. She kept her hands in her lap, nodding at intervals, pretending not to feel the heat of James's gaze as it kept drifting back to her. Finally, Clara stood. "Lily and Mr. Vale might like a moment alone," she said with thinly veiled suggestion, "to become acquainted," and just like that, they were gone. Lily remained seated, rigid. James leaned back slightly, crossing his legs, watching her, not like an owner evaluating a purchase, but like someone trying to understand a riddle. "You're scared," he said softly. She blinked. He didn't say it as a criticism. It was simply the truth. She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. "I don't blame you," he added. "This arrangement, it wasn't your choice." A beat of silence. Her throat tightened. "Why agree to it then?" she asked, surprised by her own words. Her voice was small but steady. His lips pressed into a line. "Because I don't believe in accidents." Lily frowned. "I wasn't looking for a wife," he continued, gaze still locked with hers. "But when your uncle approached me, I said yes, not for the reasons they think." "Then why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked away, almost as if the truth weighed too heavily for words. "You reminded me of someone I failed," he finally said. "A long time ago." Lily didn't know how to respond. The vulnerability in his voice didn't match the powerful image she had built in her mind. He didn't feel like a monster. But he wasn't safe either. Not yet. The wedding was set for the following weekend. No time for hesitation. No time for change. The days blurred. Designers came to take her measurements. A ring was delivered in a black velvet box. A simple band. Elegant. Heavy with implication. There were meetings with planners, photographers, florists. Everything moved forward with clinical efficiency. Lily barely spoke. Everyone around her treated the event like a performance. She was just the prop. The night before the wedding, she stood alone in the garden behind the Thornton estate. The moonlight spilled across the manicured lawn, casting silver shadows that danced between the hedges. Her heart ached with questions she couldn't name. She missed her mother's arms, her father's voice, the sense that her life had meaning beyond being a solution to someone else's problem. She whispered into the wind, "Please give me a sign, anything." A sudden breeze lifted the edge of her dress. She looked up, startled, and then she heard it. A soft voice, not real, but real enough to echo in her soul. "You are stronger than you know." She didn't know if it was her mother's voice or her own, but it anchored her. The morning arrived, cloaked in silk and gold. Her wedding gown shimmered like morning dew, ivory lace, delicate embroidery, a train that trailed behind her like the past she couldn't escape. Her veil framed her face like a cloud. And yet, when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. George stood proudly at her side as they walked down the aisle in the opulent private chapel James had reserved for the occasion. Guests were minimal, only those who mattered for appearances. Business allies, powerful names, no friends, no family of hers. At the altar, James waited. He looked the same, composed, unreadable, but when their eyes met, something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but something. She stood before him, trembling. The vows were read. The rings exchanged. The signatures completed. Lily Brooks became Lily Vale, and as they stepped out into the grand hallway lined with petals and applause, she felt both lighter and heavier at once. Her past was gone, her future unknown, and beside her stood the man who now defined both. He turned to her quietly, as the doors closed behind them, and murmured, "You're not alone, Lily, not anymore." But the words, though gentle, only stirred more questions than answers. The reception blurred around her like a painting smudged at the edges. Laughter rose and fell in distant waves. Champagneflutes clinked. Cameras flashed like sudden bursts of lightning. Lily stood still in the center of it all, wrapped in ivory silk and polished expectation, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide the trembling earth. She was married now. The words echoed through her mind like a drumbeat. Married to a stranger, to a man who looked at her with quiet intensity but spoke little, to a man 3 decades older, who now had every right to take her into his bed. The thought made her throat tighten. Everyone around her seemed pleased. Clara hovered nearby, gracefully accepting congratulations as though she had orchestrated a symphony. George grinned like a man who had just made the deal of a lifetime. The guests, wealthy, polished, powerful, whispered behind their hands about the beauty of the bride and the brilliance of the groom. Lily heard none of it. All she could feel was the pounding of her heart in her ears. James stood beside her with perfect posture, one hand loosely at her lower back, the other clutching a glass he barely sipped from. He wore his suit like armor, tailored and precise, yet untouchable. His presence was magnetic but also deeply unsettling. She could sense the tension in his jaw, the restraint in his stillness, and though he was polite and composed, he hadn't once looked her in the eyes since the ceremony ended. She glanced at him now. His profile was carved in quiet thought, the corners of his mouth neutral, unreadable. What was he thinking? Did he feel the same invisible pressure building with each passing hour, each step closer to that inevitable night, her wedding night? The phrase sent a chill down her spine. The speeches began. George raised a glass and boomed with pride. To Lily and James, may their union be fruitful, their bond eternal. There was polite laughter. Glass lifted. Lily's stomach churned. The banquet followed. Dishes too exquisite to touch were served by quiet staff with white gloves. Lily picked at her food, unable to taste anything, her mind drowning in questions. Would it happen tonight? Would he expect it? Would he take what was his? Because she was his now, wasn't she? The thought curled in her chest like something wild and trapped. She excused herself quietly during the dessert course. No one noticed. The corridor outside the ballroom was empty, dimly lit by golden sconces. Her heels clicked softly on the marble as she wandered toward the large window overlooking the gardens. Moonlight draped the lawn in silver, quiet and untouched. So unlike what awaited her behind the walls, she leaned against the cold glass, her breath fogging a small circle on its surface. She was still a virgin, not because of innocence or naivety, but because life had never allowed space for closeness. Her parents had been protective, and after their loss, there had been only survival. And now her first experience would be with a man who didn't love her, who didn't know her, who had bought her future. She didn't realize tears were slipping down her cheeks until she felt the warmth of one on her lip. Lily. The voice behind her made her flinch. She turned slowly. James stood in the hallway, hands at his sides, his expression unreadable but not unkind. You disappeared, he said gently. Are you all right? She nodded quickly. Too quickly. Yes. Just needed a moment. He stepped closer, his shoes silent on the rug beneath them. He was taller in the dim light, more human somehow, less intimidating. Still, she wrapped her arms around herself instinctively. James watched her for a long second. I imagine today has been overwhelming, he said. Lily didn't answer. He took another step closer, then stopped. I'm not going to hurt you. Her eyes lifted to his. Finally, they truly looked at each other. She searched his face for signs of deception, but all she found was silence and something else, something careful. A man used to power, yes, but also one who had learned restraint the hard way. I don't know what to expect tonight, she whispered. He exhaled softly, lowering his gaze for a moment. Then he met hers again. Nothing will happen tonight that you don't want. Nothing will ever happen between us unless you want it. Lily blinked. I'm not asking for anything, he added. I gave your uncle what he wanted, but I didn't do it to possess you. I did it because, I don't know, something about you felt important, real. She stared at him, speechless. Come, he said gently. Let me take you home. The ride to his mansion was silent. He had offered her his hand to help her into the car, but once inside, he kept his distance. The vehicle was sleek, dimly lit, and filled with the subtle scent of leather and cologne. Lily sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her veil removed now, her hair falling in soft waves down her shoulders. She felt like a porcelain doll, beautiful, dressed, and breakable. The mansion appeared like a fortress of glass and stone on the hillside, wrapped in darkness and moonlight. As they pulled through the gates, Lily's chest tightened. This was it, her new home, her new life. They entered through a grand foyer. High ceilings. Modern art. Glass staircases. It felt like stepping into a magazine. She tried not to look overwhelmed. Your room is upstairs, James said quietly. Third door on the left. Everything has been prepared for your comfort. She turned to him. And you? I'll be in the study for a while. He paused, then added softly. Lily, you're safe here. I swear that to you. And then he was gone. Lily ascended the stairs slowly, her gown whispering across the floor behind her. The corridor was lined with soft lighting and quiet artwork. When she reached the room, she opened the door and froze. It was beautiful. Soft lighting, warm colors, a canopy bed dressed in ivory linens, a vanity with a fresh bouquet of lilies, even a small bookshelf tucked into a corner. It didn't feel like a guest room. It felt like someone had tried to make it hers. There was a note on the nightstand. If you need anything, Don't hesitate to call. James. She sat on the edge of the bed, unzipped the back of her gown, and let the fabric fall away. A silk robe had been laid out for her. Smooth against her skin, she padded barefoot to the window and stood there for a long time, staring out at the dark horizon, wondering what this man truly wanted, wondering who she was now. Her wedding night had arrived, and yet she was alone, safe, but uncertain. She turned toward the bed, pulled back the covers, and slipped beneath them. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind replayed his voice, his words, the steady calm in his eyes. He hadn't touched her, not because he didn't want to, but because he respected her, and that, more than anything, left her breathless. What kind of man buys a bride and then chooses not to claim her? And what did that say about the storm quietly forming inside her chest? Morning light filtered softly through the sheer curtains, casting golden threads across the plush carpet of the bedroom. Lily stirred beneath the heavy blankets, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar softness of the bed and the silence that surrounded her. For a moment, she wondered if everything that had happened, the wedding, the reception, the drive through the night, had been some vivid, overwhelming dream. But when she sat up, reality greeted her like a whisper. The gown she had worn was folded neatly on the armchair. The silk robe still hugged her shoulders, and the quiet elegance of the room, with its ivory tones and subtle warmth, reminded her she was no longer in the Thornton household. She was in his house now, James Vale's mansion, her husband's home. And yet she had slept alone, unharmed, untouched. She pressed a palm to her chest, trying to steady her heart. There was no knocking, no calls, no one rushing her out of bed. It was strange, foreign, almost gentle. After dressing, she descended the grand staircase, half expecting to find James waiting, ready to impose his authority, to assert control, to act like the man everyone assumed he would. But the house was quiet. A maid greeted her in the hallway, smiling with polite professionalism. "Good morning, Mrs. Vale," she said. "Mr. Vale is in the solarium. He asked that I show you there whenever you're ready." Mrs. Vale. The name still didn't feel like hers. Lily followed the woman past sleek hallways where sunlight spilled over hardwood floors and artwork, lined the walls like museum pieces. The house was vast but not cold, modern but not impersonal. She noticed details. A family photograph here, a grandfather clock there. Things that hinted James was more than just wealth and power. When they reached the solarium, the maid opened the glass doors and stepped aside. James stood at the far end of the room, his back to her, gazing out over the expansive garden. He wore a simple charcoal sweater and tailored slacks, less formal than the version she had seen at the wedding. Sunlight bathed the room, warming the tiled floor and glinting off the rim of his coffee cup. He turned at the sound of her steps, and their eyes met. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and even. Lily nodded. "Good morning." He gestured to the seat across from him at the glass table. A full breakfast had been laid out. Fresh fruit, warm pastries, and a teapot releasing gentle steam. Everything smelled rich and inviting, yet she hesitated. "I wasn't sure if you'd come down," he added, reading her body language. "You're not required to do anything. If you'd rather eat in your room, I'll understand." Lily shook her head. "No, it's fine. I just didn't expect this." He offered a slight smile, just enough to soften his features. "I'm not in the habit of overwhelming people before coffee." A quiet chuckle slipped from her lips before she could stop it. It surprised them both. She sat carefully, folding her hands in her lap. The teapot clinked gently as he poured her a cup. "I imagine you have questions," he said. Lily looked down. "Many, but I don't know where to start." "You don't have to ask everything today." She looked up. "Why didn't you come to my room last night?" James met her gaze without flinching. "Because you were afraid. And because forcing intimacy doesn't create trust, it destroys it. I told you this marriage would happen on your terms. I meant it." His words fell into the silence like pebbles in a pond, rippling through her carefully guarded fear. No one had ever offered her control before. No one had meant it. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Any of it." He nodded. Thoughtful. "Neither do I." That answer, so unexpected, made her lean in slightly. "But you're the one who proposed the arrangement." He sipped his coffee. "I agreed to it. There's a difference. Your uncle approached me with a transaction. But when I saw your name, I remembered hearing it years ago. Your father once did business with a company I invested in. He spoke about you, just in passing, called you his light, his joy." Lily swallowed hard. James set his cup down. I thought I was doing something honorable, but I didn't realize how deeply it would affect you, how wrong it would feel. A pause. His voice softened. I didn't know you would haunt me. Her breath caught. They sat in that silence, neither ready to move past it, neither willing to break it. When breakfast ended, James stood and walked to the window. I have meetings this afternoon, he said, but the house is yours. Explore it, or don't. Rest, walk the gardens, or read in the library. You owe me nothing. Lily hesitated, then asked, and tonight? He turned, holding her gaze. Still your choice. He left her with that. Hours passed in soft discovery. Lily wandered through corridors lined with old books, soft carpets, and windows that opened to sunlight. She found a piano in one of the side rooms, untouched but perfectly tuned. She ran her fingers across the keys but didn't play. She wasn't ready yet. In the afternoon, a housekeeper brought her a change of clothes, simple, elegant, and a note in James's handwriting. You are free here. Begin however you need to. No one had ever written her something so simple, yet so kind. By evening, Lily sat alone in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and coral. Her heart felt still, not whole, not healed, but no longer trembling. The dinner hour came, and James returned. They ate in the dining room, quieter than the solarium, lit by warm sconces and candlelight. The food was exquisite, but the silence between them carried more flavor than anything on the plates. Afterward, as she stood in the hallway, unsure if she should return to her room or wait for him to say something, James finally spoke. I'll be reading in the study, he said. If you'd like to join me. Lily nodded, heart unsure, but legs moving. The study was lined with leather-bound volumes and framed maps. A fire crackled in the corner. James sat in a deep chair, a book resting in one hand. He motioned to the armchair opposite him. She sank into it slowly. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. He read. She watched the flames, and something in the stillness between them felt right. When the hour grew late, James stood. I'll walk you to your room, he offered. She hesitated, then nodded. At her door, he paused. Good night, Lily. She met his eyes, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. He didn't ask for what. He simply inclined his head and stepped away. Inside, as she lay beneath the covers again, the room felt different, not just safe, but hers. And in the silence of the night, a realization bloomed in her chest, uninvited but undeniable. She didn't fear him anymore, but what she feared now was the feeling that had begun to replace that fear. The days that followed unfolded like pages from a book Lily never imagined she'd be living. Each morning, the sun poured through her windows like a gentle invitation. No shouting, no demands, no sharp words slicing through the air. The silence in the mansion was not oppressive like it had been in her aunt and uncle's house. Here, silence felt like space, space to breathe, to feel, to exist. And slowly, impossibly, she began to settle. At first, it was subtle. She no longer jolted awake in the middle of the night. Her shoulders weren't always tense. Her steps through the halls grew more confident. And she stopped flinching every time someone called her name. James kept his word. He remained a presence. Steady, quiet, and restrained. He didn't hover. He didn't question her movements. Instead, he gave her distance, as if sensing that freedom was something she needed more than answers. Yet, he was everywhere in small ways. The library had fresh flowers each morning. Lilies and peonies, her favorites. A note had been left on her nightstand one evening. There's a piano in the West Wing, if your fingers ever remember how to play. The kitchen staff always prepared tea the way she liked it, strong with honey, even though she'd never asked aloud. He was watching, but not in the way others had, not with expectation, not with control, with attention, and that unsettled her more than any forced affection could have. One afternoon, as the autumn light spilled into the solarium, Lily found herself curled in the corner of the room with a book she didn't read. Her eyes wandered to the garden outside, where golden leaves drifted lazily from the trees. The wind whispered through the branches like a lullaby, and for the first time in weeks, her chest didn't feel like a battlefield. She exhaled slowly. Was this peace? Later that evening, she wandered into the kitchen barefoot, curious about the scent drifting through the house. One of the chefs, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled when she saw her. Good evening, Mrs. Vale, she said. Lily returned the smile shyly. It's just Lily. Would you like to try the apple tart? The woman asked. It's one of Mr. Vale's favorites. Lily hesitated, then nodded. As she took the first bite, warmth spread through her chest, not from the dessert, though it was delicious, but from something deeper, something that whispered, "You're allowed to be here." She returned to the study that night. James was already there, seated in his usual chair near the fire, reading. He looked up as she entered. "You came." She offered a small smile and crossed the room, sitting opposite him again. No words were exchanged for a long while, just the crackle of the fire, the rustle of turning pages, and the comfortable presence of two people learning how not to be strangers. Eventually, he broke the silence. "How was your day?" Lily blinked, surprised by the question not because he asked, but because he sounded like he meant it. "Quiet," she said, "but good." He nodded, not pushing further. She studied him from across the room, the way the firelight danced across his features, how his eyes were always alert, even when relaxed. There was strength in him, clearly. But there was something else, too, something fractured. "Why don't you smile more?" she asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. James looked up slowly. "I didn't realize I didn't." "You don't," she said gently. He was quiet for a moment, then closed his book and leaned back. "Smiling used to mean something. It used to come naturally before I realized that not everything you build lasts, and not everyone stays." His voice wasn't bitter, just tired. Lily tilted her head. "Who did you lose?" He stared into the fire, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "My younger brother," he said finally. "Years ago, car accident. I was supposed to pick him up that day, but a meeting ran late. He drove himself instead." Lily's breath caught. "I thought if I built enough power, enough walls, nothing could hurt me like that again." His voice grew keener. "But grief doesn't respect money or power. It just waits." Her throat tightened. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she reached for her teacup, her fingers shaking slightly, and took a sip to mask the emotion rising in her. He noticed. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's not exactly light conversation." "No," she replied, her voice soft. "It's real. I understand loss, too." Their eyes met across the glow of the fireplace, and something shifted, not dramatically, not like the turning of a key, but more like the cracking of old ice, quiet, slow, inevitable. The next morning, Lily wandered into the garden. The air was crisp. The roses had begun to wilt slightly. Touched by the changing season, she found herself sitting on the bench near the center, arms folded around herself, watching as a bird landed on the fountain's edge. Behind her, footsteps. She turned. "James, you always find the quiet places," he said, hands in his pockets. "They're the only places that make sense," she replied. He sat beside her, not too close, not too far. For a while, neither spoke. The fountain bubbled gently behind them. "I used to come out here when I didn't know what to do," he said. "Still do." Lily looked at him. "Do you feel lost sometimes?" He smiled faintly. "More than I admit." She hesitated. "You don't seem like someone who doubts anything." "That's the trick," he murmured. "You can look composed and still be coming undone inside." A pause. Then she said, "I felt safe here. I didn't expect that." He looked at her then. Really looked. That was all I ever wanted. Their eyes locked, and Lily's breath hitched because there was something in his gaze now that hadn't been there before. Not just curiosity, not just gentleness, something like reverence. She stood suddenly, overwhelmed. "I should get back inside." He rose too. Of course. They walked back in silence, side by side, and just before they reached the door, he said quietly, "Lily, if ever the silence feels too loud, you can speak. I'll always listen." That night, she returned to the piano. Her fingers, hesitant at first, touched the keys as if greeting an old friend. A MILLIONAIRE, soft, broken, unsure. But as she played, her hands remembered, and for the first time since her parents died, she felt connected to them again. Through the music they once loved, through the sound that filled her childhood. James passed by the doorway. He didn't enter. He just listened, and Lily kept playing. In that moment, something wordless passed between them. A strange, quiet understanding. A space shared not out of obligation but choice, and in that space, Lily realized something that made her chest ache. She didn't want to leave. There was something about the silence between them that didn't feel empty anymore. It lingered softly in the air, between morning glances over tea, between brief walks through the garden, between shared dinners by candlelight where neither felt the need to fill the space with words. Lily began to realize it wasn't silence born of discomfort. It was something gentler. A quiet built on mutual respect, on stillness, on watching without the need to take. She had never experienced that kind of silence before. In the Thornton household, silence had been sharp, heavy, punishing. It screamed of rejection, of judgment, of threats unspoken. But here, inside James Vale's mansion, silence had a different weight. It didn't demand. It invited. And slowly, without realizing, Lily started seeking his presence. She began to notice the way he entered a room. Unhurried, purposeful, calm. The way he always gave her space but never abandoned the atmosphere. He didn't hover, but she could feel him like a gravity she hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. Sometimes, she found herself wandering the hallways at dusk, hoping to cross paths with him. Sometimes, he was already in the study, reading by the fire, and she would quietly enter and sit across from him with a book of her own. She didn't always read. Sometimes, she just watched him, and he let her. There was a night, cold and crisp, when the fireplace crackled more loudly than usual, and Lily broke the silence with a memory. "My mother used to braid my hair every morning," she said softly, "even when I was too old for it. She said it was her way of reminding me that I was cared for." James looked up from his book, eyes resting gently on her. "You speak of her like she's still near." "She is," Lily whispered. "In the quiet moments, when I play the piano, when I smell cinnamon, when I walk barefoot on cold floors." She paused. "It's the small things that stay." He nodded slowly. "Yes. The small things are what shape us." There was a long pause. She could feel his gaze resting on her. Not pressing, not demanding. Just there. She glanced down at her hands. "Sometimes I'm afraid that if I stop remembering her, I'll lose myself too." He set his book aside. "You're not who you are because she braided your hair, Lily. You're who you are because of how deeply you loved her. That kind of love doesn't vanish. It becomes part of you." The words broke something open in her gently, as if they'd been waiting to be heard. That night, when she returned to her room, she wept not with the ache of abandonment like before, but with the release of something long buried. It was the first time she had cried in that house, and not felt ashamed. The next morning, there was a note on her door. "Meet me at the stables, 4 o'clock p.m." No signature, but she knew it was him. The stables were nestled on the far end of the estate, beyond the trimmed hedges and marble paths. She had never wandered that far before. When she arrived, she found James already there, standing beside a chestnut mare with a calm demeanor and gentle eyes. "I thought you might like her," he said, offering the reins. "Her name's Stella." Lily hesitated. "I've never ridden." "Then I'll teach you." She looked at him skeptically. He smiled, a real one this time. Subtle but warm. "I'll go slow." And he did. For the next hour, under the golden hue of late afternoon, he guided her through the basics. How to sit, how to hold the reins, how to trust the animal beneath her. His hand rested on her back more than once, steadying her, but never lingering. His voice was low, calm, instructive. She hadn't smiled so much in weeks. When she finally dismounted, her legs a little shaky, she turned to him and said, almost breathless, "I didn't think I could do that." "You're stronger than you think," he said without hesitation. She searched his eyes for irony, for flattery, for anything rehearsed, but found only truth. Later that evening, she stood in front of her mirror, brushing her hair slowly. For the first time, she noticed something different in her reflection. Her eyes were less guarded, her shoulders not as tight. There was color in her cheeks again, a spark, faint but real. "He didn't just give me space," she thought. "He gave me permission to exist." That realization made her chest ache in the best and worst way. The following days brought more quiet exchanges. He taught her to make espresso the way he liked it. She showed him how to braid bread the way her mother once did. One night, when the power flickered during a storm, they lit candles and sat in the library, reading poetry aloud in turns. She read Emily Dickinson. He read Rainer Maria Rilke. And between verses, their eyes met more and more frequently, until looking away felt unnatural. One afternoon, she walked into the music room and found him seated at the piano bench, head bowed slightly, fingers hesitating above the keys. "You play?" she asked gently. He looked up, a little startled. "Not well." She smiled. "Show me." He played a few notes, clumsy, unsure, then stopped. Lily sat beside him, their shoulders barely brushing. She placed her hands over his and whispered, "Here, like this." Their fingers moved together, slow, unpracticed, intimate. She felt his breath catch once, and hers did too. When the melody ended, she didn't move away. He looked at her then, not just with gratitude or curiosity, but with longing, and it terrified her. She stood quickly. "I should go check on dinner." He didn't stop her. But that night, she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the melody they had played, kept replaying the moment their hands had touched, kept wondering what would have happened if she hadn't pulled away. There was no pressure from him, no expectation. But something had shifted, not with words, not with declarations, but in the way her heartbeat changed when he entered a room, in the way she noticed his laugh, rare and low, in the way he looked at her not as a possession, but as a person, a woman, and she was no longer afraid of him. What she feared now was how much she was starting to hope. The evenings had grown colder. Autumn crept in through the windows with its golden light and crisp breeze, and Lily found herself reaching for sweaters and shawls, small rituals that made the mansion feel more like home. The world outside was changing, and something inside her was too, not all at once, but quietly, softly, like the slow unfurling of petals that had once been closed tight against the cold. She didn't know when it started. Maybe it was in the garden when James watched her with something tender in his eyes. Maybe it was when their hands brushed over the piano keys. Or maybe it was the way he had listened to her, not like someone waiting to speak, but like someone who wanted to understand. What she did know was this: she no longer felt like a guest in her own story. It was a Tuesday evening when the air shifted again. Dinner had been quiet but not tense. James had prepared it himself, something he rarely did: a simple pasta with roasted vegetables, garlic bread, and a bottle of red wine he insisted they share. There was a certain clumsiness in the way he moved around the kitchen that made Lily smile. He didn't pretend to be flawless. He didn't hide behind his wealth. He was human. Afterward, they retired to the fireplace room. No books that night, just the two of them and the warmth of the fire crackling between them. Lily curled up on one end of the couch, legs tucked under her, fingers curled around her wineglass. James sat across from her, elbow resting on the armrest, head tilted slightly, studying the flames. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but it was full of questions neither had asked, of feelings neither dared name. Finally, it was Lily who spoke. "Did you ever love someone?" His eyes shifted from the fire to her. "Yes," he said. She waited. He didn't elaborate. What happened? He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "She chose someone else. Someone younger, freer. I don't blame her. I wasn't an easy man back then. I buried myself in work. I was trying to outrun the grief of losing my brother. And maybe in the process, I forgot how to live." Lily's gaze softened. "You're not that man anymore," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "But sometimes I wonder if that version of me still lingers in the mirror." She looked down. "I think we all carry pieces of our past, even the ones we try to bury." A beat of silence. Then, before she could stop herself, the words came out. "My aunt used to tell me I was a burden, that my parents spoiled me too much, that they left me nothing but debts and trouble." James's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. He let her speak. "She said I'd never amount to anything, that I should be grateful someone like you was willing to take me." James set his glass down. "That's not why I married you." "I know," she said, "but I didn't at first." Her voice wavered. "There were nights when I thought maybe I deserved it, to be sold, to be unwanted. I kept wondering what I did wrong to end up so alone." James leaned forward, his voice low. "Lily, none of this is your fault." She nodded, but tears were already welling in her eyes. "I've never said that out loud," she whispered. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched her with a depth that made her feel completely seen. She wiped her cheek quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," he interrupted gently. "Not for your scars." Lily swallowed hard. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into the collar of his sweater and pulled out a small, thin chain. At the end of it was a worn silver ring. He held it in his hand, looking at it for a long moment. "My brother wore this every day. I kept it after he passed." His voice was calm, but something shimmered beneath it. "I still wear it. Not because I can't move on, but because I don't want to forget how much I loved him. How much I still do." Lily watched his fingers close around the ring. "We all carry ghosts," he continued. "But if we let them walk beside us instead of behind us, maybe they stop feeling so heavy." She blinked. Her breath caught in her throat. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He looked up at her. "Thank you for trusting me." That night, she didn't return to her room immediately. Instead, they sat on the couch until the fire burned low, wrapped in a silence that was no longer full of distance, but of something else entirely: shared vulnerability. Before she stood to leave, she turned to him and asked, "Why did you really agree to marry me?" He met her eyes. "Because when I saw your name, Something in me said yes before I understood why. She tilted her head, confused. "You didn't know me." "I didn't need to," he said. "It wasn't logic, it was instinct. And I've spent my whole life ignoring instincts. This time, I listened." Lily couldn't speak, not because she didn't want to, but because her heart had already answered for her. When she reached her bedroom door, she turned back. "Good night, James." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Good night, Lily." That night, she didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, one hand over her heart. It beat steadily, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. The rain returned the next evening. It tapped gently against the tall windows, like a soft reminder of all that had been buried and all that was slowly beginning to bloom. Lily stood by the window in the music room, arms folded, watching the sky turn from ash to charcoal. The storm didn't scare her. Not here. Not anymore. In fact, the sound of rain had become oddly comforting, as if the world was pausing to breathe with her. Behind her, the piano sat silent, but her fingers itched to return to it. It had been 3 days since that night by the fire, the night of confessions, of unspoken grief, of truths that still lingered in the air between them like something sacred. And something had shifted since then. Lily could feel it in the way James looked at her, less like a man trying to keep his distance, and more like someone waiting patiently for her to come closer. His gaze no longer held reservation. It held reverence. She found herself walking toward the piano without thinking. Sliding onto the bench, she touched the keys lightly, the way one might test the surface of a still lake. Her fingers moved slowly, drawing out a familiar melody, one her mother used to hum while cooking. It was simple, a lullaby of sorts. But beneath the softness, there was longing. She was halfway through when she sensed him. James stood in the doorway, saying nothing, just listening. The shadows of the room stretched between them like quiet witnesses. His presence didn't startle her. It grounded her. She kept playing. When the final note faded, she looked up. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "You didn't." Her voice was calm, almost warm. He stepped into the room slowly, like someone entering a church. The rain behind them softened, and a breeze lifted the edge of the curtains. She noticed he'd removed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled just enough to reveal strong forearms, and there was a trace of something tired or tender in his expression. "Was that something you composed?" he asked. Lily shook her head. "No. My mother used to play it when I couldn't sleep." He sat in the armchair near the window. "It suits you." She tilted her head. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. "Because it's honest, gentle, but not fragile." Her breath caught. She looked down at her hands. Silence stretched again, but not uncomfortably. "Do you miss her every day?" he asked. Lily nodded slowly. "Some days it's louder than others, but it never goes away." He leaned back, folding one arm across his chest. "That's how I know it was real. When someone leaves a mark that deep, they mattered." She met his eyes then. "You're good with words when it counts." A faint smile touched his lips. "Only when I'm not trying too hard." She rose from the bench and walked toward the window, stopping a few feet from where he sat. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You make it easier, talking about her." James looked up. "Why?" "Because you don't try to fix it. You just let it be." He gave a soft nod. "Some things shouldn't be fixed, just honored." They stood there, both looking out at the falling rain. The soft sound of it filled the silence between them, and in that moment, something shifted again. Deeper this time, not just comfort, not just peace, longing. Lily turned to him. "Do you ever wish things had happened differently?" His gaze locked on hers. "Yes." "Like what?" He took a slow breath. "I wish I'd met you under different circumstances." Lily's chest tightened. "I wish it hadn't started like this," he continued. "With debt, with desperation, with fear in your eyes every time I entered a room." Her voice was barely a whisper. "And now?" James stood slowly. He didn't touch her, didn't reach, just closed the space between them. His presence was as steady as always. "Now," he said gently, "I'm just grateful you stayed." She blinked back, the sudden sting in her eyes. His hand hovered near hers, not grabbing, not demanding, just offered, and this time, she didn't pull away. She let her fingers find his. The warmth of his skin sent a ripple through her, not from fear, not from confusion, but from something soft, blooming. They stood like that, not in an embrace, not in anything obvious, but in something truer, a beginning. He brought her hand slowly to his chest, pressing it gently over his heart. She felt its steady rhythm beneath her palm. "No expectations," he whispered. "Just this." Lily's breath trembled, and then, without thinking, without planning, She stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat of his breath, the subtle rise and fall of his chest. Her fingers curled slightly against him. His hand moved to her cheek. Not hurried, not greedy, just present. She didn't flinch. In fact, she leaned into it. Their foreheads touched not in passion, not in heat, but in something more delicate, reverence, like two survivors whispering to each other without words. When he finally pulled back, he didn't kiss her, and somehow, that made it more intimate. He looked into her eyes. "Lily." She swallowed. "Yes? I don't want to hurt you in any way. Ever." Her throat tightened. "You haven't." He hesitated. "But I could." "You haven't," she repeated, firmer now. "And maybe that's what scares me." "Why?" "Because I don't know what to do with someone who's good to me." His eyes closed briefly at her words. Then he opened them again. Voice low and raw. "Let me show you." She nodded, not with words, but with the smallest step forward. Her arms found his waist, and for the first time, she let herself hold him not as a stranger, not as a husband by arrangement, but as a man who had seen her, truly seen her, and hadn't looked away. His arms wrapped around her carefully, and she buried her face in his shoulder. The scent of him clean, warm, something like cedar wrapped around her like a memory she hadn't known she needed. They stood like that for a long time, just two hearts finally beating without armor. And as the rain continued to fall, Lily realized that something had shifted for good. She wasn't just safe with him, she wanted to be near him. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just survival anymore. It was the first flicker of something she'd stopped believing in a long time ago. Tenderness and love. Lily had always thought that the first time she kissed someone, it would be awkward, maybe rushed, maybe trembling, maybe something that happened and left her wondering why everyone made such a big deal out of it. She never imagined it would feel like silence finally finding its voice. The moment had been building not through rehearsed words or romantic gestures, but through quiet moments, the kind that settled into her bones and stayed there long after he'd left the room. It started that evening. She was in the garden again, sitting by the old stone fountain just after sunset. The sky had turned lavender, and the first stars had begun to peek through the thinning clouds. The cold nipped at her fingers, but she didn't mind. The chill kept her present, real. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. James moved through the garden like he belonged to it, or perhaps like it belonged to him. He wore a dark sweater, his coat unbuttoned, and his expression unreadable but not cold. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice a gentle thread in the air. Lily shook her head. Didn't want to be indoors. The walls were too quiet. He sat beside her on the edge of the fountain, not too close, not too far. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" He turned his head slightly. "Yes. What did you see?" He didn't answer right away. Someone trying not to fall apart in a room full of people who didn't care if she did. She exhaled slowly. "That's accurate. I remember thinking," he continued, "that you were carrying more weight in your eyes than most people carry in their whole bodies." Lily swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I thought you were terrifying," she admitted. James raised an eyebrow. "Terrifying? You were so composed, so silent. I couldn't read you. I thought you'd crush me without blinking." A faint smile touched his lips. "And now?" She hesitated. "Now I think you're just as afraid of being crushed as I was." His smile faded, replaced by something deeper. His eyes didn't leave hers. "You might be right." The wind stirred around them. Lily reached up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and James's gaze followed the motion. But he didn't move. He didn't reach. He waited, and somehow, that made her bold. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to be." "I'm not afraid of you," she clarified. He looked surprised. "Then what?" "Of what this is becoming," she said. "Of what I'm starting to feel." He leaned in slightly. "What are you feeling?" Her heart pounded. "Everything I told myself I wasn't allowed to feel. Safety, warmth, trust, and more." He said nothing, just breathed. She could feel the weight of his restraint. So this time, it was her who closed the space between them. Her fingers reached gently for his jaw, brushing against the edge of his stubble. Her hand was small against his face, but it was steady. She guided him to her, her gaze locked with his, and when their lips met, finally, quietly, the world stopped spinning. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't desperate. It was true. A kiss not of possession, but of presence, of two souls touching through a doorway neither thought they would ever open. His hands rested lightly on her waist, barely holding her, as if afraid she might break if he dared hold too tight. Lily deepened the kiss with a softness that surprised her. She wasn't hesitant. She wasn't unsure. She was choosing this moment. Choosing him. When they pulled apart, their foreheads remained pressed together. Her eyes fluttered open. James's chest rose and fell beneath her hands. He looked at her, not like a man who had won something, but like someone who had finally come home. "I didn't expect you to do that," he said softly. She smiled, breathless. "Neither did I." He touched her cheek with the back of his hand. "Are you all right?" Lily nodded. "More than I've been in a long time." They didn't say what it meant. They didn't need to because everything in that kiss had already spoken for them. Later, they returned to the house together. Lily's hand lingered in his as they walked. Not for show, not out of fear, but because it felt natural, right, like they were finally moving in sync. Two lives that had collided under impossible circumstances, now finding rhythm. Inside, he walked her to her room. At the door, they paused. "I know this wasn't how either of us imagined things," she said. "It wasn't," he agreed. "But maybe," she continued, "some things don't need to start the right way to become right in the end." His gaze softened. "You're not what I expected, Lily. You're more." "So are you?" They stood in that quiet corridor, bathed in golden lamplight, and the silence between them was different now, not a distance but a bond. He didn't ask to come in. She didn't invite him. It wasn't the moment yet, but they were moving toward it, slowly, surely, together. "Good night," she whispered. James lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her fingers, reverent, tender. "Good night, Lily." She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breath-catching. Her lips still tingled, her heart still raced. But she wasn't trembling from fear. She was shaking from something else entirely. The overwhelming, undeniable truth that she was falling in love with the man she had once feared the most, and this time, she wanted to fall. The morning after their first kiss, everything felt changed. And yet, nothing had changed at all. Lily still woke in the same room. The same sunlight poured through the same curtains. The same soft rug brushed her bare feet as she crossed to the window. But her heart moved differently now. It didn't pace like a caged bird. It beat with a quiet rhythm of something long, unfamiliar. Peace and expectation. She touched her lips without meaning to. The memory of James's kiss was still there, not in taste or sensation, but in the weight it carried. It hadn't been rushed. It hadn't demanded. It had promised. Downstairs, the scent of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon drifted through the air. She followed it barefoot, the hallway silent except for the hush of her breath. When she entered the kitchen, he was there. James stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes with a focus that made her smile. His presence filled the room not just in size, but in steadiness. The man who once intimidated her now felt like home. He glanced up. "Good morning," he said, voice low but unmistakably warm. "Morning," she answered softly, stepping inside. "You cook now?" He shrugged with a boyish smile. "I've been practicing. For me, for us." Something fluttered in her chest. He plated the food and motioned toward the table. They sat across from each other, sunlight painting golden stripes across the wood. She took a bite, surprised by the tenderness of the pancakes. "These are good. Don't sound so surprised." She grinned. "I didn't know CEOs flipped pancakes. I didn't know I'd be trying to impress my wife." Her eyes dropped to her plate. He said the word without hesitation, wife, not as a legal label, but as something lived. After breakfast, they took a walk through the orchard near the edge of the estate. The trees were still heavy with the last of the autumn fruit, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. Lily wore one of James's coats, too large for her, but comforting, scented faintly like him, cedar, warmth, and something she couldn't name. They walked in silence for a while, their fingers grazing, until he gently took her hand in his. "You don't have to hold back anymore," he said, watching the wind stir her hair. "I'm not," she replied. But she was not because she didn't trust him, but because the depth of what she was beginning to feel terrified her. He stopped beneath one of the trees and turned to her. "Lily, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why me?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I was a stranger. Older. Wealthy. Yes. But distant. Cold. You had every reason to shut down. Every reason to resent me. But you didn't. You opened." Lily stepped closer. "Because you never forced me," she said. "Not once. Because you were patient with my silence. Because you made me feel safe, when I didn't even know I could still feel anything at all." She reached up, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "Because your presence gave me space to remember who I was, not what others said I had to be." James's eyes closed for a breath. When he opened them, They were softer than she had ever seen. "I've fallen in love with you, Lily," he said. There it was. No dramatic music, no grand gesture, just truth, laid bare between them. Her lips parted, but the words caught in her throat. He didn't push, didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to say it back," he added gently. "I just needed you to know." She stepped even closer until they stood heart to heart. And then, with a voice that trembled with truth, she whispered, "You're not the only one falling." He breathed in sharply. She saw it. He reached for her slowly, reverently, and pulled her into his arms. Their second kiss was nothing like the first. This one was undeniable. It bloomed with all the tenderness they had stored in unspoken moments, in shared silences, in late-night conversations and soft laughter. It tasted of trust and something impossibly sweet. Hope. His hands cradled her back. Her fingers found the edge of his neck. Their bodies fit as though the space between them had been made for this moment all along. When they parted, neither said a word. They didn't need to. They returned to the house that afternoon with fingers still intertwined. Everything between them felt new, not delicate like glass, but delicate like flowers after the rain. Fresh, alive, and resilient. The staff noticed. They smiled without speaking. The air was different now. The mansion, once cold and grand, had been filled with something more powerful than wealth. Warmth. That night, Lily walked into the study while James was choosing a record. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening instantly. "I was just thinking of you," he said. She smiled. "I know. I could feel it." He placed the record on the player. A soft jazz tune filled the room. Slow, romantic, smoky. He walked toward her, hand extended. "Dance with me." Lily hesitated only for a second, then placed her hand in his. They swayed slowly, her cheek resting against his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. The fire flickered. The rain returned outside. Gentle and steady, he leaned down and whispered, "You've changed everything, Lily." She looked up. "You gave me the space to become who I always was." His lips brushed her forehead, and as they danced, wrapped in firelight and rain, Lily realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, loving, becoming. And for the first time since the night her life shattered, she was whole. The winter came softly that year. Snow blanketed the estate in silence, muffling the world in white. Trees stood still like painted statues, and the air shimmered with cold and anticipation. Inside the mansion, the fireplaces burned steadily, casting golden light across the marble floors and warming the corners of a house that had once felt so empty but now held something sacred. Life. Lily stood before the window in the nursery, one hand resting on the round swell of her belly, the other clutching the edge of a blanket she had been folding. Her reflection was different now. Her face had softened. Her eyes, once shadowed with sorrow, glowed with something new, not just peace, but purpose. 7 months had passed since the day she kissed James under the stars. 7 months of slow, steady transformation, of whispered confessions and shared routines, of mornings with coffee and laughter, of nights filled with soft jazz and arms wrapped around her like protection and promise. And then one morning, the test had come back positive. At first, Lily had panicked. Her hands shook, her breath caught, her heart raced with 100 questions. Was she ready? Would he be? What if the past came rushing back to steal what she had barely begun to build? But then she had walked into the study, the test clutched in her hand, and found him reading by the fire. He looked up, saw her face, stood instantly. She didn't speak. She just showed him. And James, the man once so composed, so unreadable, blinked, then blinked again, and smiled a real smile. Wide, disarmed, almost boyish. He took her into his arms without a word, and for a long time, they just held each other. "I've never had a family before," he whispered that night, his hand resting protectively over her belly. "But if you're mine, I'll never need anything else." Now the baby was nearly here. The nursery had been transformed. Soft blue walls with ivory molding, plush rugs, shelves filled with books and stuffed animals. Lily had chosen everything herself, but James had been there for every step, from picking cribs to assembling mobiles, to standing in the baby store with a look of absolute confusion over bottle warmers. He was nervous. She could tell, but he was also present, and that was what mattered most. "Do you think he'll have your eyes?" she asked one evening as they lay together on the couch. James traced a slow circle over the curve of her stomach. "I hope he has yours and your heart." She smiled sleepily. "What if he has your stubbornness? Then we're in trouble." He laughed softly. They fell asleep that way, tangled in warmth with the sound of the baby's steady rhythm between them. The labor came on a Tuesday. It started with a sharp tug low in her abdomen as she was brushing her hair. At first, she ignored it. Another Braxton Hicks, probably, but then came another and another. By the time she called James's name, her hands were gripping the edge of the vanity, and her breath came in shallow waves. He appeared instantly. "I think it's time," she whispered, eyes wide. He didn't panic. He simply took her hand, kissed her temple, and said, "I've got you." The drive to the private clinic was fast but careful. Snow was still falling, quiet and persistent, like a hush over the world. Lily clutched his hand tightly in the car, and James never let go. "I'm scared," she confessed in a whisper. "You're strong," he replied, "and I'm right here." At the clinic, everything moved quickly. Nurses moved efficiently. Doctors murmured reassurances. Lily was guided to the birthing suite. James changed into scrubs without a word, but his eyes never left hers. Hours passed in waves of pain and breath, contractions rolling through her like thunder. James held her hand through all of it, wiped her forehead, whispered encouragements, kissed her knuckles between each surge. "You're doing beautifully," he said over and over, voice low and firm. She cried once, not from pain, but from fear, the weight of everything she had lived to reach this moment crashing down all at once. And James, his voice rough with emotion, said, "You've already given me the world, Lily. Just hold on a little longer." And then a cry. Sharp, clear, alive. Time stopped. Lily's head fell back. Tears streamed down her face. The doctor smiled. "You have a healthy baby boy?" James stood frozen. For a moment, he couldn't move. He just stared at the tiny, wriggling form, now being placed on Lily's chest, red-faced, perfect, his little fists flailing like he had been born to fight for his place in this world. Lily looked up at him, breathless, radiant. "James," she whispered, "he's ours." He stepped closer, fell to his knees beside the bed. His hand hovered over the baby, almost afraid to touch. But then he did. He brushed one finger along the baby's soft cheek. The child turned toward him, his mouth searching. Tears welled in James's eyes. Silent, stunned. "I've built empires," he whispered hoarsely. "But this, him, you're the only thing that ever truly mattered." Lily reached for his hand, and together they sat there, mother, father, son, wrapped in a moment too sacred for words. That night, in the quiet of the hospital room, James cradled their son against his chest. Lily watched from the bed, tired but glowing, her eyes never leaving them. He looked up. "He looks like you," he said. She smiled. "He looks like hope." They named him Oliver, and as James whispered the name over and over, rocking the child with a gentleness that would have shocked anyone who had known him before, Lily knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of something bigger, something sacred, something whole, family. Spring arrived like a quiet miracle. The snow melted from the edges of the garden, giving way to soft green shoots and blossoms, shyly opening toward the sun. The mansion, once cloaked in cold and silence, breathed with new life. And not just in the season, inside those walls, something sacred had taken root, and its name was Oliver. Lily stood on the veranda in the early morning light, cradling her son in her arms. He was just 3 months old, but already he had changed everything. His tiny hand clutched the fabric of her dress, his breath steady against her collarbone, the warmth of him pressed against her heart in a way no words could capture. She looked out over the garden that had once felt like a gilded prison. Now it felt like freedom. She closed her eyes and whispered softly into Oliver's ear, "You were born into love." Behind her, footsteps. She didn't need to turn to know it was James. He always approached her with that same quiet energy, like he never wanted to disturb what she was building, only walk alongside it. He came to her side and placed one hand on the small of her back. His other hand gently brushed their son's head. "He sleeps better when you hold him," he murmured. Lily smiled. "He knows my heartbeat." James kissed her temple. "So do I." They stood there in the hush of morning, wrapped in stillness and newness, and something bigger than either of them. Parenthood had not made James softer. It had made him more present. He was still composed, still quiet, but his walls had lowered, his schedule had changed, his priorities had shifted. The man who once commanded boardrooms now woke in the middle of the night to rock a crying baby with unshakable tenderness. One afternoon, she found him asleep in the nursery. Oliver curled on his chest, his hand still resting protectively over their son's back. The sight had stopped her breath, not because it was rare, but because it was real. Lily never imagined a life like this. Not when she stood at the edge of her parents' grave. Not when she was sold into a marriage she never wanted. Not when she trembled through her wedding night, waiting to be broken. But love had come anyway, not as a storm, but as a shelter. It had come through patience, through silence, through a man who had chosen her not as a prize, but as a person. One evening, as the sunset spilled orange and rose across the sky, James brought her a letter. "I found this," he said, offering it gently. "In one of my old boxes. I wrote it the week after we married." Lily took it, her fingers trembling. He didn't stay. He kissed her cheek and said softly, "I'll be in the garden if you need me." She unfolded the page, the handwriting familiar now. "Lily, you don't know me yet. Not really. And I know you didn't choose this, but I need you to know what I chose. I chose you. I chose to give you space. I chose to respect your silence. I chose not to touch you that night, not because I didn't want to, but because you looked like someone the world had already taken too much from, and I refused to be another thief in your story. I don't know what this marriage will become, but I promise, if you ever begin to trust me, I will never let that trust be broken. Yours in Key at Hope, James." Tears blurred the words not because they hurt, but because they healed. She folded the letter and held it to her heart. Then she went to find him. In the garden, he was tending to a new patch of lavender. His hands were dusty, his sleeves rolled, his hair slightly windswept. He looked up as she approached. "I read it," she said. He straightened, brushing off his palms. "I meant every word," he replied. Lily stepped closer. "You wrote that before you even knew if I'd ever let you in. I knew I wanted to be worthy of the chance." She reached for his hand. "You were," he exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders melting. "And you are," she added. A pause, then her voice steadier than ever. "I love you, James." His breath caught. She said it again. "I love you." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. "You saved me." "No," she whispered. "We saved each other." Their kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was the kind of kiss that says, "We've made it, and we're not going back." Later that night, they sat by the fire with Oliver asleep between them. The house was quiet. The world outside hushed in spring's early warmth. James looked at her, his arm around her shoulders. "You ever think about how it started?" he asked. Lily nodded. "All the time. And what do you feel when you remember?" She smiled softly. "Gratitude." He tilted his head. "For what?" "For the pain, for the silence, for the fear, because without all of it, I never would have known what it meant to be held." He pulled her closer, his lips at her hairline. "You are loved, Lily, deeply, wholly, always." She closed her eyes and let the words wash over her like a blessing. She had been sold, she had been silenced, she had been afraid, but she had survived, and more than that, she had transformed. The girl who once trembled in the shadows of her past was now a woman wrapped in warmth, holding a child and resting against the man who had never tried to fix her, only love her as she found her own way home. And as the fire crackled and the baby breathed softly between them, she whispered a prayer not to escape, not to forget, but simply this: "Thank you for letting love find me where I thought it never could." She was sold as a bargaining chip. She entered that house with fear, scars, and a heart in silence. But there, where she least expected, she found arms that didn't trap her. They embraced her, and in the warmth of patient love, she was reborn. Because sometimes, what seems like a sentence is the beginning of a miracle,